Welcome back everybody to another episode of our weekly Moto News Roundup. But this time we'll be looking at the latest on the turbulence at both Harley and KTM. But then on a more positive note, some exciting new rumours for bikes that could be released in the next few months from Ducati, Triumph and Kawasaki. Then Honda have announced updates for one of their biggest sellers with an interesting new feature. Kawasaki are offering an incentive to get new riders on the road, and we'll round off with QJ Motors' big American-inspired tourer that might have one slight shortcoming. Now, if you've been watching our recent episodes, you'll know about the unrest at Harley-Davidson with one of their bigger shareholders, H Partners, launching a campaign to oust some of the board, citing their dissatisfaction with the direction of the company and the subsequent financial results. And it looks like they're not wrong, with Harley's Q1 financial report just released, which follows on from a disappointing 2024 that we covered a few episodes back. Now globally, compared to Q1 2024, this year bike sales were down by 21%, being hit particularly hard in the US and Latin America. The US is their biggest market, of course, and rider parts speculate that a lot of this drop is down to the uncertainty in the US economy, which has led to consumers pulling back on luxury goods. And I think, in a market where most people ride for pleasure, and with a product lineup that's definitely on the more spendy end of the spectrum, well, perhaps it's no surprise that they're not selling as many bikes if people have a bit less spare cash. But then you've also got Livewire, their electric sub-brand, which is split out as a sort of separate entity in this reporting. Now, you'll perhaps remember, if you've seen the recent episodes, that this is one of the key targets of H Partners' campaign, let's say, against the board, with them specifically wanting it dropped as soon as possible in favour of reintroducing more traditional bikes like the Sportster 883s, and this is something they directly call out on their website, which is called freetheeagle.com. Go and have a look if you want more details on what they're trying to achieve. But look, again, it seems like they might be justified, because can you guess how many bikes globally Livewire sold in the first quarter of 2025? It's 33, just 33 motorcycles across the globe, and that's despite the fact that they do have new products that have recently launched, like the S2 Del Mar, or even more recently, the more sporty naked version of that platform, the S2 Alpinista. The lack of sales is clearly one of the factors that means they're running at a loss, down $20 million for that particular quarter, although they might point out that that's not as bad as Q1 2024, where they lost $29 million. Now, on the one hand, electrics are always going to run at a loss until the market demand kind of grows. But still, you can see, with Harley in a bit of a sticky situation at the moment, why that might be one of the parts of the business that they want to cut loose. So yeah, still looking pretty tough for Harley. I'd love to know from you what you think they could change in order to turn things around. And would you buy an air-cooled 883 if they somehow managed to reintroduce it? For me, they're probably my favourite Harleys that I've reviewed over the past few years, because they've got that proper soul and character. But perhaps it's never really going to happen, with stricter emissions regulations coming into play pretty much every year, it seems. Let me know what you think, though, down in the comments. Meanwhile, over at KTM, it's still rolling on this saga, and their parent group, Pira Mobility, well, they were due to publish their financial results for 2024, but they haven't done so yet. Their explanation being that they're still going through that restructuring process, which will affect the numbers for last year. If you're not up to speed, they recently went through a self-administration process which led to a bunch of court proceedings that saw them have to restructure in order to continue, and that was off the back of a couple of years of really bad sales, during which they built up a massive backlog of 250,000 unsold bikes, and that's resulted in them having to pause production at the factory a couple of times, most recently, a couple of weeks back, and that's still ongoing. Despite not publishing their full results, though, they still have given some top-line numbers on the Pira Mobility sort of press area of their website, and as you might imagine, it doesn't make for particularly good reading. Sales for 2024 were down by 29% on 2023, and that means they generated 1.9 billion euros, which sounds like a heck of a lot of money, but for context, that's down on the 2.7 billion euros of 2023. That, of course, is one of the factors that's landed them with this net debt of 1.6 billion euros. So yeah, some more specifics, I guess, on the situation in terms of the financials, although we already knew it was pretty bad. And I guess the next big thing to wait for is in 2 weeks' time, when they're due to pay back 30% of their debts, which amounts to 600 million euros, through the administrator. And this is a real crunch date because it's not particularly apparent where that money's going to come from. And so, of course, hit subscribe if you haven't already to get the latest when that date arrives. We'll certainly be covering the outcome. As for these financial results and why they might be tweaked, I guess it's got something to do with the fact that they're still due to pay this 30% of their debts. And if that's successful, I suppose their debts from last year, well, they say they're going to make a restructuring profit of 1.3 billion euros. That's because they're wiping off, 70% of their debt. And so potentially good news for them as they look to kind of struggle to find a way forward. But I can't help but thinking about all the suppliers who are only getting a third of their money back and how it might have affected them. Certainly not great news for them at all. Like I say though, we got a couple of weeks until we find out what the next steps are. I personally really hope that KTM do manage to find a way forward. I think the motorcycle world would be a massively worse place without them. And of course, we got plenty of jobs on the line as well. So although I do feel for the suppliers, we want to see KTM move forward. But on top of this restructuring and trying to find some money to keep things going, and of course wanting to get production back up and running, they've also got another drama that's just come in with one of their board members, Stefan Zuckerling, basically taking them to court because he feels like they owe him some money. Now, he's one of their board members, but also the CEO of parts manufacturer Remus, who are fairly closely tied with KTM because they make stuff like their official accessory exhausts. And he loaned, through his company Dabepo Holdings, 80 million to Pira Mobility, it's believed, when things got really tight at the beginning of this self-administration process. So he gave them the money to help them keep going, and it's said that he was expecting some shares back in return for the loan by June this year. Obviously, that would go into his holding company. Thing is, though, it seems like he's not particularly pleased with them and perhaps feels like they weren't particularly honest, perhaps, about the size of the financial issue when he first gave them this loan. And also it's said in some of the reporting that I've read that it wasn't particularly clear to him as to how deep the relationship was with Indian manufacturer Bajaj, who make all of the 390s and below, who've also recently taken on, it's believed, a greater share of Pira Mobility. So yeah, they're in court for that. And I believe Pira Mobility are countersuing him and saying he can't have his money back early. And so it seems like another headache that KTM could probably do without at the moment. Fairly gloomy stuff. So perhaps let's lighten the mood with some new motorcycles, of which we've got plenty this week. First up, one of our spy shot sources sent us these pics, believed to be a revised Ducati Monster. At the back end of last year, Ducati revealed their new V2 engine, which is set to replace their sort of dated Testa Stretta, which powered many of the different bikes in their lineup. Now, granted, the new V2 is pretty similar on performance, but it is much lighter, more compact, and it also ditches their Desmo valve system for simpler servicing, and also that's allowed them to give it variable valve timing on the intake, which has led to a really usable spread of torque in the low to mid-range, whilst also still being a very happy engine to rev out. And I can vouch for that firsthand, having recently reviewed both the new Panigale V2 and the new Multistrada V2 as well. So yeah, the Panigale, the Street Fighter V2 and the Multistrada V2 have all been moved over to this new engine, but there are still plenty of other bikes on the Testa Stretta like the Monster, the Desert X, the Hypermotard, and so it's expected that these will all soon follow suit. Now, these spy shots clearly show that the next one is probably going to be the Monster, with that new V2 engine very visible in these shots. Although, of course, it's not as simple as just whacking a new engine into an existing chassis. There's going to have to be a ground-up redesign as they build the bike around it. So if you look a little bit closer, you're going to see a new frame, a new swing arm, a different wheel design, perhaps they've shed a bit of weight there, and then a different styling package wrapped around it, so a slightly different tank shape, and also a revision to the headlight, which means it's now got this circular daytime running light, which I guess references the sort of more traditional shapes of the original Monsters. Still, I'd expect this to be kind of roughly similar to the existing Monster in terms of the riding experience. I don't expect them to substantially change the formula, but potentially a little bit lighter given that there's less weight to the engine, and potentially a bit more peppy because of the engine. Like I say, it's not that different in terms of performance figures, but it feels so happy to rev out. It's really entertaining on the road, and so I'm very much looking forward to trying one of these out when it comes. I think it'll make for a brilliant sporty naked bike. One of the other models expected to make the leap soon is also the Desert X, although we don't yet have the pics of this one, but motorcycle.com have done a bit of digging, and they say the evidence comes from a new vehicle identification number decoder with confidential written on it in big red letters, but published by the US National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration. We expect the document will be taken down shortly, so it's a good thing we've already got our grubby hands on it. Basically, the different letters in Ducati's VINs give you some idea as to what model and what engine is going to be used in that particular bike, and this document that's been leaked plainly says that from 2026 the letter A will be an 890cc twin, so almost certainly the new V2, but it differs from code A, which is the number for the new V2 engine, because this version has a gearbox that's dedicated specifically to the Desert X. So there we have it, a new V2 powered Desert X is on the way and will probably be announced during their run of world premieres, which are typically in the autumn and lead up to EICMA, where we tend to get our first view of the bikes in the flesh. As always, we'll tell you all of the details as soon as we have them, along with that new Monster, and so again, do hit subscribe if you want to stay up to date with those. One of their headline announcements for this year, though, was the new Panigale V4, which was heavily updated with some little tweaks to the engine, but then a substantially revised chassis and also some developments to the tech. What wasn't updated, though, when they announced it at the back end of last year, was the V4R version, which is the super spec variant that's homologated for use in World Superbikes. It's basically a necessity if you want to race in World Superbikes, and so if they want to race the new Panigale V4 from next season, then they're going to have to get a V4R on the new platform ready, because currently this season they're still racing the old bike. What's specifically interesting though about the VIN decoding document for this particular bike, which does confirm a new V4R is on the way, is that previously all the different variants of the Panigale V4, like the special editions and the V4R and the standard model and the S, well, they were all lumped under one letter, which I believe was G. Next year, though, the R model specifically will get its own letter, P, so it's called out separately from the rest of the Panigale V4s, and that suggests that it might be substantially different in some kind of way. Now, up until now, well, it's always been kind of different in that it uses a slightly smaller engine. The Panigale V4s get an 1100 V4, whereas the V4R has always had a 1000cc version in order to comply with the World Superbike engine specs. And so again, it'll have to meet those requirements, but because they've split it out, potentially there are some substantial differences on the way for the rest of the bike, like the chassis. I'm certainly looking forward to finding out what they do with it, and again, expect this one by EICMA in November, so stay tuned. Meanwhile, over at Triumph, well, they've been teasing a new model with a short video on their Instagram that appears to show a new, more performance-orientated version of their Speed Triple 1200. They say, redefined for the ultimate track focus. The wait is almost over, 13th of May, 2025, which I think you can probably gather is when they're going to fully announce this new bike. Truth be told, we've already got the details, but we can't tell you anything about it because it's embargoed until next Tuesday. But if it does look like your cup of tea, well, we've got a full video plan with all the details, and so do check back on Tuesday if you want to see that. Now, also on the naked front, perhaps off the back of the success of Honda's CB1000 Hornet, which has been a huge seller this year, well, Kawasaki are apparently planning to slap their 1100 inline 4 from the Ninja 1100 SX Sports Tourer and the Versys 1100 into a big naked bike, which would effectively be a successor to their discontinued Z1000. This one comes from a filing from the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, which is a database of pollutants that often leaks new bikes. It must be quite annoying for manufacturers to have to file their bikes with them, but there's a model code in a recent filing from Kawasaki that's ZR1100HT, which is almost certainly a Z1100 naked. Given how well the CB1000 Hornet's done, this is probably going to be a smart move by Kawasaki Kawasaki, although the engine might need a little bit of a tweak to make a comparable peak power figure. The sort of Versys 1100 and Ninja 1100 currently make around 135 horses. The Honda makes about 150, so it might need a bit of a bump. And also, with the CB1000 Hornet starting at about 9 grand, well, it is a tall ask, but this one would have to be very competitive on price to make it look tempting to anyone who's considering a Hornet. Still, another one I'm looking forward to seeing what they come up with. And speaking of Honda, well, they've just announced updates to one of their biggest selling bikes, which is the CB125F. Probably not a bike that a lot of our viewers are considering buying, but it is a great utilitarian workhorse, and it does have a significant development that may trickle down to other Honda bikes in the near future. You see, it's got the usual updates like Euro 5 Plus emissions compliance, a new TFT dash with a USB port and phone connectivity, a revision to the bodywork for a little bit of a sharper look to it, but the big one is this new idling stop tech, which they say is a first for a manual Honda motorcycle. Now, in their words, the biggest revision to the proven engine formula is the addition of idling stop, making the CB125F the first manual transmission Honda motorcycle to feature the technology, following successful applications on the Vision 110, the SH125i, the PCX 125, which I believe are all scooters, but also the DCT-equipped Goldwing Tour. The advanced technology switches off the engine at a standstill, reducing both fuel consumption and emissions, and operates in any gear to seamlessly restart the engine as the clutch is let out. Sounds sensible to me if it works smoothly, and in my experience of trying the Goldwing Tour, it does just that. It's a really nicely implemented system that kicks in very quickly as soon as you touch the throttle, so it's never really an inconvenience. And of course, on top of the fact that it's going to save you a bit of fuel, it also sounds quite nice for a bike like the CB125 that's frequently used in the city if it just kills a little bit of the heat from the engine while you're sat at the lights. So it looks like, again, it'll be a perfect bike for new riders, especially on a CBT, but if you are hoping to go straight up to a big bike, then Kawasaki might be able to tempt you with a new offer for anyone who's just passed their test. You see, they've got £500 off a Z900, a Ninja 650, a Z650, a Z650 RS, a Vulcan S, a Ninja ZX6R and a ZX4RR, and then 400 quid off the price of their 500 lineup, so the Ninja 500, Z500 and Eliminator 500. All you have to do is show your pass certificate at your local Kawasaki dealer, and that unlocks what is a very handsome discount, and it's valid for 12 months after you pass your test, the start of May up until December 31st this year. Great to see Kawasaki helping more riders to get on two wheels, although I might advise against going for a Z900 or ZX6R as your first bike. Anyway, let's round off today with a look at QJ Motors' latest bike, which comes in the form of an American-inspired, fully loaded tourer that was recently picked up by Cycle World. I say American-inspired, but this one is basically a full-on copy of an Indian Roadmaster with pretty much the exact same styling, and also, you know, a V-twin at the beating heart of it. Thing is though, whereas you'd expect close to 2 litres from the V-twin in a Roadmaster, well, this one is a little more modest in terms of displacement at 400cc, which means it's said to put out about 35 horsepower. Now, it's a lot lighter than the Indian. It comes in at about 225 kilograms curb, but then if you're 2 up with the luggage full of all your stuff, well, that poor little 400cc V-twin is probably going to be screaming for dear life as you try and reach a decent speed on the motorway. Realistically, I guess this one's just going to be set for the Chinese market only, but with a bike of that size, with those sort of power figures, that might be for the best. As always, I'd love to know what you think of this week's stories though, so do leave a comment below. And also, I'll put last week's episode on the screen now in case you missed it, in which we looked at a new, very well-priced 625 adventure bike from Vogue, and also a rather fancy-looking special edition Trident, courtesy of Triumph. Do hit subscribe for more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on MOTOBOB. As always, a massive thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.